All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Juanita McGonigal. I am a former co-president and current membership chair of the Class of 2004 Alumni Council. And if this is your first Lunch and Learn, we really want to welcome you. And for those of you who are returning and have been lunch and learning with us throughout the years. Thank you so much for helping to make this a really great event. We really appreciate it. And we hope that you actually get something out of attending these panels that we coordinate for you. Today's topic is finding your rhythm. And I think a lot of you who have joined can really relate to the topic, and that's why you're here. And so I want to, without further ado, introduce our speakers today. Mr. Jon Gordon, class of 93, and Miss Allison Hill, class of 93 as well. A little bit about our two speakers today. Jon is a best-selling author, and his principles have been put to the test by numerous Fortune 500 companies, professional and college sports teams, school districts, hospitals, and nonprofit. He is the author of 18 books and 5 children's books, including 10 bestsellers. So he's got a lot of information to share, and I'm looking forward to hearing every word. Our second speaker today is Miss Allison Hill. She serves as a senior executive for Roark Capital, a private equity firm based in Atlanta. She is the head of diversity and social responsibility, developing and leading Roark's initiatives related to diversity and inclusion, philanthropic giving, and community service, as well as a member of Roark's ESG committee. Allison previously served on the executive team at one of Roark's portfolio companies, Miller's Ale House, as the vice president of marketing. She has earned her undergraduate and MBA from Cornell University. So she is a super Cornellian, and we are really glad to have her joining us today. I just wanted to thank you both for participating, and I won't say another word. Please take it away.
Well, thank you, Juanita. It's great to be with you, and it's an honor to be doing this with Allison. If we have the slides up, Cornell has been a huge part of both of our lives. For me, it changed my life. I went there to go play lacrosse. There's a picture that you see with Mike Levine, who is now one of the leaders of CA Sports, and Mike and I played lacrosse together at Cornell. Had an incredible experience there, learning about leadership and culture and teamwork. Graduated Cornell and then moved to Atlanta right after college. Moved down there with a car and a dream to create a life. Didn't know what I was going to do, but I wanted to create a life. I started waiting tables. Then I got involved in the restaurant business, went to law school for a year and a half, eventually went to go work for a .com, finally asking, what am I born to do? And writing and speaking came to me. That was about 31 years old. Finally figured out my path and my calling. Met my wife in Atlanta when I was 24. We now have 2 children. They are 22 and 20 now. And so when we talk about the topic of finding your rhythm, we know about rhythm. Alice and I both do because of balancing work and family and life, and how to create a life, how to create a career in the midst of all the challenges that come associated with that. Especially in this past year, we've all been through a lot of challenges and how we navigated that. So I'm excited to share with you today, and I'm excited that Allison, our superstar and super Cornelian, is with me sharing as well.
Thank you, Jon. It was so great. Jon and I actually ran into each other, I don't know, maybe it was 15, 20 years ago in the airport when you were just writing your first book. So have been really happy to see all of your success over the years. But what I want to share with you, when Rachel and Juanita and Nicole first reached out about this topic, it made me chuckle a little bit. And there's something I want to share with you that's on the next slide, which was my first introduction to balance, but it was when my dad and mom were dropping me off at Cornell freshman year back in 1989. And we went to Roelof's, and my dad's a West Point guy. So of course he's like, okay, here's my last pieces of advice for you. And he's like, balance, work hard. You're going to have so much studying to do. Make sure you play hard too. Backup, because that's dating myself. Of course, we needed backup for our computers. Penises, as in don't touch them. Wear your seatbelt. Cardio, because that was a big thing, you know, in the college lifestyle, making sure I got my exercise in, and beer, don't drink it. So it was a really interesting because it made me think about this balance thing. So if you go to the next slide, I took them really seriously. And with the work hard, I definitely did the play hard. And that's how I met my husband first semester freshman year. So you can also tell that I'm not a really good rule follower. Definitely didn't follow rule number 3 or number 6. But fast forward a little bit, and like Jon was saying, life is complicated. And when you have two ambitious people that meet each other younger in life, and you have to make all of the different balancing of everything. And then you have a growing family and you want to stay in touch with friends. And as you go on and on, your roles just start to expand and change. And so when we were prepping for this, and you can take the slides down now, but when we were prepping, I loved when Jon said about finding your rhythm. It really struck me, because when my dad talked about work hard, play hard, I understood what he was trying to say, like make sure you have as much fun in life, like enjoy your life as much as you work. But I don't think it took into account that some of us really like what we do, and life is pretty complicated. It's not just work and it's not just play. So Jon, I want to turn it back to you, because it really struck me when you came up with the title for this. And what does that mean to you about finding your rhythm?
Well, we often talk about work-life balance, and I believe balance is a myth, because when you are doing what you love, there really is no balance. You're passionate about it, you're working a lot at it, and it really consumes you in a lot of ways. Also, in today's day, with people working a lot from home and working so much in their jobs, there's really not a lot of balance there as well. So it's not about finding balance, it's really about finding rhythm. You may work really hard for a few months and then take a week off. Your rhythm may be where you work hard for 6 days and then you have that day off where you find some rhythm to recharge and rest. My wife and I have learned over the years with two children and me on the road speaking a lot, we didn't have a lot of balance, but we would look at our calendar year and we would say, okay, I'm really busy these months. I'm slow in July. I'm slow in December. So let's make that family time where for the whole month we will really engage as a family. We would take family trips and go on, great trips together and spend a lot of meaningful time together. We really bonded during those times, but we didn't have a lot of balance some of those months where I'm on the road, coming home, going back again, and pretty crazy. And I think life could be like that for a lot of us. But the key is to be intentional, to find your balance in the course of the year, where you look at the year and you say, okay, there's a season for everything. This is a season to work really hard. This is a season to rest. This is a season to reap the harvest of all the work that you put in. So there's going to be seasons in the course of the year, just as there's a season with the changing, weather, and we now are moving into spring and it's getting beautiful right now, and the trees are blooming and the plants are blooming. We start to see different seasons unfold, and it's like that in our life too. So you have to say, okay, what season am I in, and how do I find balance in the course of the year? So when I look back, the whole year had some balance to it, but there wasn't a lot of balance each day or each week. So that's what I mean by rhythm.
Yeah, I love that. And when I think about rhythm too, one of the words that stuck out to me that Jon just said was your rhythm. And so I'll share with you, it was like during one of those times where I was feeling sorry for myself. I was doing too many of the household duties and mad at Jeff about this or that. Okay, so we decided that we were going to go to a marriage counselor, and they had us do this exercise that I'm going to share with you. You don't have to be married to do this, but it taught me a lot about myself. And the side benefit was Jeff and I made out at the elevator bank, and then we never went back. So if you picture your life as a pie and you start making, that's all there is, right? There's just that much of you. And if you can write out the slices of pie to the size of which these things are important to you, because what will really start to emerge is that it's not about what you do, it's about who you are. And you'll be able to see all these different roles, but also the things that you're passionate about or that you love and that energize you. And you can start to figure out, like, these are my pie pieces. And just like Jon was saying, you need to make time for those, but it might not be at the exact same time because nobody is superhuman. And so anybody that's pretending that they're having it all at one time, it's a myth, I will tell you. But to be able to gauge your pie piece is and figure out like what's going to be more important at a certain time to find that rhythm. And so it's a quick exercise. It could take you 5 minutes, but I think it really provides a little bit of clarity in a very simple way of what are the things that make you happy. And I don't know, Jon, if you had an experience where you guys were out of rhythm or you were out of rhythm as a person, but would love for you to weigh in on that.
Yeah, there were definitely times that I was out of rhythm. I always recognized when I was out of rhythm when I was, traveling maybe a lot, doing a lot of speaking, and I started to get exhausted. When I would find myself not wanting to go on the road to give another talk, I was definitely out of rhythm. When I found myself detached from my wife and kids, I was definitely out of rhythm. And there was one time in particular that my wife said to me, "You need to stop traveling. Like, you need to be home. We are struggling. Your kids are struggling, and you have to be home." And so I stopped traveling. I was doing about 15 engagements a month, and now I cut it back to 2 or 3. So now I'm home all the time with my family. I'd been on the road for years at this point, and now I'm home. My kids are like 13 and 15. And my first thought was like, wow, they're really nice people when I was with them. And then I realized, okay, like I gotta help out here because they were struggling. And I admit it was hard in the beginning. I wanted a different team because they were struggling so much. But then I started to serve. I started to invest. They became, in many ways, my main focus. And from there, at the end of the year, I realized I didn't need a different team. I needed to become a better leader. And when I started to serve my team and I was investing in them, I grew so much that year as a leader, as a person. So people listening to this, you may be a lot younger than I was when I figured this out. And this is what's great about learning now. Like, don't wait too long. I figured out later. And what I found was my team got better and they improved, and then I improved as well. And interestingly enough, that's when my career took off. See, we often think that we have to make our career our number one priority. Like, it has to be the most important thing in the world. But what I have found is when we put first things first, everything else increases. And the year I actually put my family first, that's when my business grew the most. So it's like when you focus on what matters most, things will improve. And I think we often think, okay, I got to focus on my work, got to ignore this, I got to ignore that. I believe we can handle 3 things, at one time, 3 main focuses. And you have to identify what those 3 things are. Try to do more than that. It's not going to work, but figure out those key 3 things. And after that year, I did have a lot more rhythm, a lot more balance in my life after that year of learning that. But again, even leading up to it, as I said, we still always had our months here and months there, and no one was really struggling, up until this point. So it wasn't like I was ignoring my family that needed me. Everything was going great. So I didn't think anything was wrong. Only when something was wrong did I realize, okay, it now needs attention. And that's when I gave my focus to it. How about you, Allison? Was there a time when you said, okay, like, you know, being the leader you are in the corporate world, leading a family at home, because we know like you're the leader. I always say I'm second in command at home. Being a leader at home, did you find a time when maybe you were working too much and you had to spend more time with your kids?
You know, it actually, that's a really great question because I think that was a little bit of my struggle before I made the pie pieces, is that I realized when I did that how much I enjoyed being a mom and how I was putting false expectations on myself for my career. So a little similar to you, but meaning that once I gave in to the fact that like I'm not trying to go up the corporate ladder, like the people around you are, but that's not really what your purpose is. Your purpose is here to learn, to build, to do the things that you love. And when I started to understand me as a person, that's when success followed. As soon as I came to that understanding of what was important to me, because I was happier, I was more productive. Um, and I think those are a couple of the traps, like the things that I was thinking about when you were talking. One is that we compare ourselves to other people. You know, I think we're a society of, especially now with social media and the Instagram and all of this, but the 30 under 30 list and the, like you're like, oh my gosh, wait, I'm supposed to be ambitious. Why am I not achieving? And so I think one of the big learnings that I told myself was don't compare to other people, like you have your own path. And then also ambition doesn't have an expiration date. So don't get so caught up with, I'm not going to achieve this or that. Like, just know that you're, back to your rhythm and back to your pieces of the pie kind of shifting in size based on what season you're in, that there's going to be time to achieve everything. You just have to realize it's a journey of doing all of these things, and you shouldn't put the pressure on yourself to do everything at one time.
And we're talking about this from our place of where we are now, but also if you're younger, if you're in your 20s and 30s and you're listening to this and saying, okay, well, I don't have kids right now. It's about finding your rhythm of where you are in your life, saying, okay, I'm going to work really hard, but I have to take time for me to refresh, to recharge, to re-energize myself on an ongoing basis. Because if you don't, you will eventually burn out. I meet a lot of young people, they are going, 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 and they're trying to strive to be successful. And I think it's noble. We all want to be successful, but you do have to make time for you, to invest in you, and also in things outside of work that will energize you, so that way you have more energy when you are back in work. Otherwise, you're always giving, you're not recharging and not receiving, and eventually you'll burn out. You might resent your job, or eventually you might say, you're gonna have a midlife crisis at a young age saying, what do I want to do with my life? And I think it's really important to say, okay, how can I be my best every day and grow? What I had to figure out was, what are my strengths? When I was younger, what are my strengths? What do I want to focus on in order to be my best? And I realized, okay, these are the things I really like to do. I love to write, I love to speak, and I love to energize people and encourage people. I'm going to focus on these things in addition to my family, but from a career standpoint, I'm going to focus on this. And my core focus and purpose was positivity. I narrowed it down to, that's what I'm most energized talking about. That's what I love to do. So once I zeroed in my strengths, right? Balance was easier. Rhythm is easier when you're doing what you want to do every day, focused on doing it. And then you grow in that, and you're known for the things that you do well and known for your strengths. So it's really important to identify what your strengths are so that you can thrive in the rhythm, in the balance. Does that make sense, Allison?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think that's great. No, if I look back at my younger self and some of the times that I wasn't as happy or feeling as balanced, a lot of it is because I was working against the tide, and leaning into your strengths and taking some of those tests online, whatever it takes to help you, go out with cocktails with your friends and have them analyze you. I was lucky enough that my best friend at Cornell turned out to be a therapist. So she's been great for all those conversations. But the more that you can lean into your strengths, the better. It's a myth that you need to work on your weaknesses and that's what's going to make you better. Just throw that out the window, figure out your strengths, and then go for it. And I think sometimes when we know that we have weaknesses, they're hard to admit. And so, because it's about us not being perfect. And I don't know, Jon, if you ever had a case of, the perfectionism versus being imperfect and how that's helped you become more into your rhythm.
When I look back at my time at Cornell, and I talk to young athletes about this a lot, I had a desire for perfection, and I never really enjoyed playing the game because I was always striving to be perfect. And if I wasn't, I was mad. If I didn't play well, I was mad. My performance was what my identity was all about. So my identity was tied to my performance. And so often when we're perfectionists, what it really means, what I have found and discovered, is that we actually feel unworthy. And because we feel unworthy, we're trying to seek worthiness or recognition through our perfection, through our accomplishments. And that was me, trying to seek recognition through my accomplishments. As a Cornell person, we often do that, right? Cornell graduates, we tend to be driven and focused. And that's a good thing, to be driven and focused. But if we're driven for recognition, for praise, and ultimately to satisfy our identity or our ego based on their accomplishments we have, then we're always going to be seeking. The key is to really understand that who you are should never be tied to what you do or the performance and the success that you have. And when you are a perfectionist, it really is the same as someone who feels unworthy and doesn't feel like they deserve something, because you're getting your worthiness or your recognition through your accomplishment. So I struggle with that big time. Once I realized my life was not about me, it was about others. How can I serve others? How can I make a difference? How can I make an impact and try to take it off me? It's interesting. That's when I started to do work that really mattered and start to make a greater impact and start to feel better. But it still comes up. Of course, you write a book and you want, you wonder if people like it or not. And are they going to pan it? And what do the critics say? And there's always some negative reviews on Amazon, right? I've written 23 books. There's definitely some negative reviews on there. And it doesn't make you feel good. But at the same time, you know your purpose, you know your strengths, you know your passion. When you know your why, you'll know the way, and you won't let obstacles get in the way. So for me, it's really important to make sure that you're focusing on what matters most and not allowing anything to be tied to your identity of who you are.
I love that. I feel so inspired now. I need to write that down. I think we have a recording. Um, yeah, I think especially for women too, from all the studies from and the research that I do for my role now, you really learn that perfectionism can be a problem. And it was really interesting because it was my first 2 weeks on my job. And, I wanted to be perfect. Like this was my big break to do something really big and really important, to have my purpose, to have my why. And sorry, guys, I have 3 dogs if you hear them barking. And the founder of Rourke comes in my office, and here's like this most revered man, one of the best private equity people in the world, so smart, like can't even tell you how smart he is. And he shuts my office door and he's like, I'm going to give you something to think about. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, I want you to figure out that you do not have to be perfect here. This is a culture of collaboration, iteration, and most importantly, I really want you to be vulnerable. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm getting this like pep talk from this amazing man about being vulnerable. Like this has never happened in my life. And he was so right. And what he was trying to tell me is like, it's not about you and who you are and the work that you're producing. It's about how are you bringing a team alongside you, and how are you seeking input from others and continuously improving every idea. And so I think if I had known that earlier in my career, of not trying to be so buttoned up and perfect, I think it goes to that point that Jon was making about serving others. Like really, you're just serving those around you and helping to make everything a better product or a better team. And so I think being vulnerable is really connected to not trying to be perfect, and something that we all need to learn.
I love that, Allison, because it's also about being okay with failure, like knowing that you're
Yeah,
going to fail. It doesn't define you. It's
right.
meant to refine you
It
to be
hurts.
all that you're meant to be. And throughout my life, right, I think about it was actually great that I failed a lot right after college because I got used to it and I got okay with it. And when you're free to fail, then you're willing to go after it in order to succeed. And I meet a lot of entrepreneurs. I work with a lot of, companies now, a lot of leaders, a lot of great organizations, just like yours. And you meet people who have a lot of success, but they failed a lot. But we don't talk about their failures now. We talk about all the things they did to succeed. And yet, if you really look closely, they were failures along the way that actually led to their success now. So you have to embrace both the failure and the success. And being vulnerable is everything. I work with a lot of sports teams, and I work with, Clemson football. And one of the things we did with Clemson football was have each guy share their hero, their hardship, and their highlight as part of an exercise. Hero, hardship, highlight. This is a great team building exercise if you ever want to do this with your team. Who's your hero? Tell us about a highlight in your life you're proud of and a hardship you faced that made you who you are today. Tears were coming down. Guys were crying, sharing their stories. They got to know each other a whole lot better. And when that happened, they truly became a team. When you're vulnerable, that leads to a greater connection, psychological safety, which then leads to a greater commitment amongst the team. And so knowing that you're not going to be perfect, knowing that you make mistakes, being okay to share those mistakes and being willing to say, hey, I messed up, but here's how I'm going to improve. Here's how I'm going to get better. That allows you to be a real teammate, someone that they can connect with, which then they actually start rooting for you instead of someone who says, I have to always be perfect. I have to always have the best results. I have to be someone who never shows weakness and never shows failure. And those are the people that are actually hard to connect with as a leader and as a team. So when I advise leaders, I always say, make sure you share the real you so that way your team can connect with you. And guess what? When they do, they're going to more likely follow you as a leader because they don't follow the vision, they follow the leader first. It's you that matters first. Who you are determines how you lead.
I love that. I'm going to make my kids do this exercise.
Oh, it's
I'll
wonderful.
let you know how it goes. I think this topic of being vulnerable, though, is very important in COVID time when we start to think about the vulnerability of asking your partner or your roommate or anyone for more help, right? Because you're feeling overwhelmed, or you want to say no to your boss that keeps emailing you because you're trying to figure out your new COVID boundaries that we've all experienced. So I don't know, Jon, do you have advice for people on being able to say no in a healthy way, or establishing these boundaries during COVID? Or I think it's really hard for people right now.
I'll say a few thoughts on that. Then I'd love to hear what you think, since you are probably more of an expert on that than me. But in terms of, I'm talking to a lot of people where there are no boundaries anymore. A lot of people are working from home. And the old adage of it's just business, it's not personal, that's history. We know it's personal. We hear the dogs bark. We hear the kids and the babies cry. We see your setup in your apartment and where you're living. So we're actually learning and getting to know each other a lot better in a deeper way. And I actually think in many ways it's a good thing. I'm talking to a lot of leaders and people in companies who feel more connected in some ways because of the great conversations they're having, because of the fear that everyone has been through, how they've talked about overcoming together. And as a result of that, there are greater connections. But at the same time, there is this feeling that I'm home, I could always work. And maybe there's an expectation that I should always be available. And I think that goes to communication. Where there's avoiding communication, negativity will fill it. So we always have to make sure we're filling that void. So I think it's great to talk to the leadership. And if you are the leader, to talk to your team and say, hey, what's our expectations? What's our standards? How do we do things here? How do you want to do things? How do we want to navigate this time together? What's what's satisfactory to you? What's acceptable? And have those conversations. All my team, they work from home, and we've done this actually for years. So COVID was nothing new to us. We've always worked from home. And my rule is I don't care when you do it. You can do it whenever you want, just as long as it gets done and you're able to fulfill your role and responsibility. And we've always had clear understandings that way. And I think it's about getting together, having those conversations, talking about it. And if your boss, for instance, has unclear expectations or unacceptable or unrealistic expectations, then you really do have to talk about that, because we are in new territory, and I think it's okay to bring it up and have that conversation in a meaningful, constructive way.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think you just need to communication is the key. Other tips and tricks: block your calendar for the times that you need. I mean, depending on, you need to understand your cultural norms of what an organization can really do or not do. So that is one thing I do, is block my calendar when needed. And we are in private equity and we are in deal mode most of the time. So we are pretty much a 24/7 business. But what that means is I may have my phone next to me, but then I can prioritize, hey, I can get that to you tomorrow morning. Or, hey, can I, or maybe it's super important and I do have to do it right then. But I think, establishing boundaries as your cultural norms see fit can help. But definitely, if you are struggling, you need to communicate that in a very vulnerable way and have those discussions, because you're going to figure out if that's even the organization you want to be a part of anymore. Because like we were talking about before, your rhythm is going to shift, your pie pieces shift, your life shifts. You have, all these different things that come up throughout the different seasons of your life. And that's part of what we need to do as humans, is take a step back and assess, is this the right place for me? Do I feel at peace? Am I doing what I love? Am I leaning into my strengths? Like all those questions. Make sure that you continuously assess where you are and what's important to you, but don't make rash decisions. I do see that happening a little bit right now, especially with young mothers. I think you've probably seen the reports of all the women that are maybe exiting the workforce. And I would just tell everybody to hang on, find somebody that you can talk to that can tell you to hang on. You can call me. But I think it's really important to find some temporary solutions and wait, the world is almost back to normal again.
I love that you said assess, Allison. That's awesome. You said assess because we have to be adaptable. We have to basically be open to new ideas, new situations, and new things happening. And so I think what we've learned this past year is we have to adapt, we have to innovate, and we have to assess where we are. Your relationship is going to change at different times at work and also at home. My wife and I, we had to basically say, okay, wow, I'm used to being on the road all the time. This past year, I've been home all the time, as she would say. I asked her on a scale of 1 to 10, how much she'd like to be married to me. She said pre-COVID or now. And so I knew right then and there, all right, we gotta find our space. So what we would do is we would find our space in the day. I would take 2 walks a day for an hour each just to get out of the house, go for these long walks. And it was a way to clear my head, get some sanity, and also give us some space. And then some days we took walks together. And so we had to find our new rhythm and our new way of living and working together at home. And the same thing is can be said for work as well. You have to do that as well. You have to assess where you are. Okay, what are we learning right now? How can we grow from this? And then what actions do we want to take now going forward? But I just love that you said assess. That's what we have to do.
Yeah. And I know Juanita wants to open it up to Q&A. I think there's just one more thing that, and if Jon, if you have some comments on this too, but one other thing that I think is really important for personal rhythm or personal balance is expecting the unexpected. I think sometimes we go through life and we're like, okay, we've got it all mapped out. And to know that there's always going to be something that comes up, and to use Jon's word about positivity, you just got to roll with it. It can be a flat tire. It could be, we had a daughter that was in and out of the hospital for a few years. And yeah, when that happened, my pie totally switched. It was hospital, work, and then a little sliver for wine, but everything else was off the table, right? Like I wasn't going to lunch with friends or do whatever. And I think you just have to know that that's going to happen and that it's not going to be, harmonious all the time. You're going to have tough things in life because that's life. To know, just to expect the unexpected and just take a breath and reassess and refigure out how you're going to approach it. And you'll just have a better mindset when you do that.
That's so good. I don't have anything to add to that because I think you nailed that. My wife and I wrote a book, Relationship Grit, and we talk about how expectations can be very dangerous in a relationship if you don't talk about those expectations, and knowing that things are going to change and things are always going to come up. As you said, unexpected things happen. And in those moments, you have to communicate, you have to connect, you have to commit, and you have to care. 4 C's: communicate, connect. Make sure you commit to each other about what you have to do in that moment and show you care. And this works for work teams as well. When things come up, how do we communicate as a team? How do we connect as a team? How are we committed to each other? And how can we show that we care? When you do that, you're going to build a stronger team through any adversity, any expectation, or any new thing that comes up.
Awesome. So Juanita, are you going to run the Q&A? Yes, there she is. Hi.
Hello, everybody. I don't know about the rest of you listening, but I feel like these two have been in my house for the last year. All very relevant topics, and we really, really appreciate you sharing your points of view and giving us those important tips. I think it's really important that we all remember to take care of ourselves, take care of our family during this time that we've been going through, and that I'm sure we have to face because it's not over yet. But I want to open up the floor for our Q&A, and we've got several questions from our attendees. Joe, I think it's Maraschino, I apologize if I've pronounced that incorrectly, asks, can you please give an example of your pie pieces and how often do they change?
Yeah. So, well, one funny story, I had my friend do this exercise, my friend and his wife, they're both my friends, and he turned over his pie piece and it was like sex was the majority of it, and then like a little thing for family. So really your pie pieces can be, and I was like, please do this for real. And he's like, no, I'm serious. So your pie pieces can be whatever you want them to be. For me personally, I had my kids separate from my husband. I didn't lump all my family together. I had my relationship with my parents is very important to me. So I had a pie slice for that. I'm passionate about running and reading and cooking. I mean, like really anything. And that was one of the things that I realized too, when I finished my pie piece, was sometimes as working moms, we farm out as many duties as we can. And I think that's great. Like if that's for you. But what I realized was I was missing like that cooking component. Like there was something that was really intrinsically that I loved about cooking for my kids every night. And so realizing that that was an important part, when I sat back and looked at everything, I was like, okay, like I'm going to figure out how to do this every night because it's important to me. And so it can be something as silly as that, or, some of the other bigger things that we want to do. And I think the important thing to do when you're thinking about your pie pieces is to make sure somebody else's agenda isn't coming in, right? Because there's expectations from a lot of people around us. This should be your harmonious things that make you happy and bring you joy, not what somebody else's goals are. And then absolutely back to the assessment, like I was saying, they will always fluctuate. And depending on what happens in your life, they may fluctuate. Jon was talking about being on a book tour, your work piece is going to go bigger and your personal piece may go smaller, but at least you're very cognizant of how that's all working together and how it's all integrated.
That's great, Allison. I think I'm going to direct this next question at Jon. Denise Ward asks, I find it very difficult to be so physically removed from my team and staying connected. What are the best practices to keep that connection? How are you and your team, even pre-COVID, how have you been maintaining that balance?
So I've talked to a lot of teams about this. We've been using Zooms, we've been using video conferencing, as a lot of people have. But as a leader, one thing you can do is to connect with one person on your team every day. So just try to reach out to one person a day and have a meaningful conversation, a meaningful connection. You might get on FaceTime, it might be a phone call, it might be a Zoom, whatever it is. Just try to connect with one person a day in a meaningful way. Also, getting together as a team once a week at least, doing team building exercises. I'm a big believer in picking a word for the year. So everyone on the team pick a word for the year that's going to give you meaning and mission and passion and purpose. So pick your word, have your team pick theirs. Everyone picks their own word, and then share with each other why you chose that word. That word, again, is such a fun thing to do. And then when you share it with your team and you know their words and you know the why behind the word, it's a really cool exercise. And then when you're talking to each other, hey, how's your word going? How are you living it? It's a really good team building exercise and something to keep you connected. So on an ongoing basis, since we don't have that physical connection, and we can't replace that. So let's not sugarcoat it. We can't replace that physical connection, but we can find meaningful ways to connect. And in some ways have even deeper connections when we're doing intentional things like this.
Um, I think that's really important to keep in mind, and that's a great exercise, John, to point out. I have just a few more questions from our attendees. And actually, this one is for you as well, John. An anonymous attendee asks, one of my biggest strengths is writing, but I don't enjoy doing it at all. I find it so consuming and taxing. I hate it, but it's my role at my startup. John, as a writer, do you relate to hating writing? How do you overcome its challenges? And any tips when you hate doing what you're good at?
Wow. That is so good to hear. And Allison sounds like she has some advice on that.
No, I just love the question and the honesty in it.
I love it.
That
So,
where your strength is something you don't enjoy. I just think it's interesting.
so what comes to me when I hear that is it's a strength of yours, but you don't love it. Your sweet spot is when you're doing what you love and it is a strength. So clearly this is not your sweet spot if you don't love it, even though it's a strength. So find the joy in it. And for me, it could be what you're producing and the impact it's having on others, what you're writing about. When I think about the reader and I focus on loving the reader and loving the process of writing, I write a lot better. Do I get stressed when I have to write? Yes. I've never given birth, but it's the only thing that I could equate to in terms of you feel like you have this idea inside you, you have this book inside you, you have to write it, and you get very anxious during the process of it. My wife calls me the mad scientist when I'm writing a book because ideas are coming to me. I know I have to write and get it out. So it can be painful at times. So I have that. I admit that. And that may be how you feel as well. But when it's done, there's this release and there's this great feeling of, wow, I just gave birth to this. And again, I know it doesn't compare to a woman giving birth. I want to be very clear on that. Okay. And so, but in doing that, that feeling of finishing makes it feel great. And maybe you could focus on how great it feels to finish. And also the fact that you do have this gifting strength and it's allowing you to be able to share your gifts where many jobs don't allow you to do that. So find the positive in it. And if you can't, then I would say find something else that you are strong in and also love to do, your sweet spot.
You know, he should read, or she, whoever anonymous is, The Seed, your book. Don't you think that's about like,
yeah, it's that intersection of it's your passion and your purpose, and it's what you love to do. And it's about a 27-year-old who goes on a journey to find his purpose because he's really disengaged at work. And so his boss gives him 2 weeks, like a reverse 2 weeks notice. Take 2 weeks and come back and tell me if you really want to do this job. So he goes to find his purpose. He's given a seed by a farmer, has to decide where to plant the seed. When he finds where to plant the seed, his purpose will be revealed to him. And so that's the journey he goes on. It's the journey I had to go on because there were things I was good at, but I wasn't passionate about it. I didn't love it. And the key is to find what you're passionate about, what you love, and also your strengths that you can use as well.
I would tag on to that question because I often find myself feeling this way. I'm very good at certain things that are very technical, but I have no passion whatsoever for. The problem is finding that intersection for me, not only between what I'm good at, what I'm passionate about, but also what's going to compensate me in a way that helps me to achieve the lifestyle I would like to live and to give to my child. And that to me, overlapping those three things is what's really complicated because I can certainly do a job that I know that I would be passionate and good at, but it's not going to pay me as well.
That's such a great insight, Juanita. I love that because years ago when I was in the restaurant business, I owned 3 restaurants and I had to ask myself, okay, I'm good at this. Like I was really good at the restaurant business, but do I want to do this for the rest of my life? And I didn't love the restaurant business, although I could have opened 10 or 20 of them. And I had the foresight to say, 10 years from now, if I have 20 restaurants, will I be happy? Will I be doing what I love? And the answer was no. So I sold them and I focused on writing and speaking. My wife was like, what? You're going to give up this income and you're going to write and speak where you're not successful? And I was like, yes, there is no plan B. She said, what happens if it doesn't work? I said, there's no choice. Like I'm either going to do this or fail trying. And I made that decision. I'm not saying this is right for everyone, but I knew that I had to do this. And I love what you said. Compensation, providing a lifestyle is important too. Where can you create the intersection of all those three?
And the only thing I would build on that, Juanita, is that sometimes now that I'm a little bit older and can reflect back on where I may have felt what you feel now, is realizing that it was a building block to where I wanted to go. And if I had just stayed maybe a little bit more in the present and focused on what is it that I'm really learning that I'm going to take to my next goal, I think that would have helped me too, because I don't think I could be where I am now without some of those other experiences where things were not quite right.
Totally. Okay, our next question. Also from an anonymous attendee. I like finding your rhythm rather than finding work-life balance. Thank you. Have you had conversations with your team or leadership that didn't go well when you explained that you needed to find your rhythm? If so, how did you handle it? Change jobs?
I changed jobs for that. Absolutely. So I had worked at Coca-Cola for a number of years, and then one of my mentors recommended, her big piece of advice was raise your table, Allison, raise your table. She's like, you need to go into a smaller environment, more accountability, more responsibility. If you had stayed over here, you would have had this job by now. Like, why don't you go try to do that? And so I did, and I got my dream job, and I was head of marketing for a big restaurant company. There's about 100 restaurants, full service, and got to do like a rebrand, like it was everything I had always strived to be. But there was a catch. I was getting on a plane every week, and I was leaving my two girls, and I had an apartment there, and I had a car, and I kind of figured out how I could do the Tuesday 5 a.m. flight, come back Thursday at midnight, but everything was out of rhythm. Everything. My girls weren't sleeping the same. They said they missed the food groups. Like everything was just, I didn't feel like I was good at my job and good at home. And it just didn't feel right to me. And it was one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make, was to say, you know what, like, love the job, but this whole thing is not working. And so I stayed, a couple years to finish up the projects that I had started and the strategies and building the team and the whole thing. And then I left and I went and looked for something else that was in Atlanta. And so I think, don't be afraid of change. Not everyone figures out what they're going to do for the rest of their life. But just listen to those signs, do the assessments. And so in that role, I took everything I could to learn and grow, and then use that to go to my next step. So yeah, sometimes you do have to switch. And I don't know if you have, Jon, a time that you had to communicate, like the other part of the question that Juanita had.
Don't be afraid to take this idea to your team and talk about, work-life rhythm instead of balance. Share this with your team and talk about, hey, what's our rhythm? And also share when you work best, because some people work best working 6 days straight and a day off, or 5 days and 2 days off. And if you take this to your leader, to your boss, or to your company, to your team, and say, hey, this is how I work best, I think they're going to be open to it. I shared something with my, head of marketing the other day, and I said, hey, I'd love, we're going to go brief, execute, debrief as our new model. So I want you to brief me on what you're going to do this week. I want you to go execute, and then just debrief me on what you did. And I think that will both keep us informed and have better communication. We've been working together for years and we've just decided this, but we were always having, conversations where I thought, okay, this would be a lot better to make us both happy. He loved the idea, but he said, I'd love to get it to you just on Monday. So I want to share what I accomplished the week before on Monday and share what I'm looking forward to for the week. I said, great. That's perfect. He was telling me basically his rhythm of work, what works best for him. And I think, again, it goes back to communication. So often we just don't communicate because we're afraid, we're scared, we don't have the time, we're too busy and stressed. When you make the time to communicate and have these kind of conversations, and sometimes they're difficult conversations, but you have them, everyone becomes better and you become more productive in the process. So take it to your team and talk about rhythm instead of balance.
I liked what Jon said too about what your chief marketing person said. They said, this is how I feel and what is going to work for me, not like you've put this on me. Sometimes I feel like we don't go with the solution and from our point of view, but you're doing it more of what the employer is doing wrong or what the boss is doing wrong. It's just like any relationship or marriage, like you need to talk about it from your point of view.
There's actually another question here that sort of feeds off of what we were just discussing, and Sarah Huang asks, how do you get comfortable expressing vulnerability in a competitive environment, and what wouldn't one be perceived as weak and sheepish? Either of you feel free to jump in on that.
Allison,
one.
go ahead. I'll go after you, Allison.
Are you sure?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think being vulnerable just means that you're seeking input. It doesn't mean that you're showing that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're showing, your underbelly of, I think it's just more about understanding that you need to seek input to find the answers and to collaborate with people. I think it's more that, because, and then I think actually when I look at the best leaders that I've ever worked for, or the best leaders that I admire, I think they are very vulnerable. They're always seeking input for things or feedback or admitting that they don't have all the answers. It's one of the things I love about where I work now. Like, it doesn't matter if you're the most junior person in the room. Our founder will ask for your opinion and wants it, like legitimately wants it. So I think being vulnerable is about just being you and really seeking opinions of others, which makes them feel more special and more that they're a part of the conversation.
Also, that's being authentic as well, being real, being you. But at the same time, I do have to say, if you are working for a boss who doesn't bring vulnerability to your culture, it will be challenging. And so I think that's what the question is. If you have someone who's not vulnerable and not okay with people sharing vulnerability, it will be hard for you to be vulnerable. In those cases, right, you may not be the leader, but let your performance shine. And when you become the leader, then you can create more vulnerability on your team and share that important trait. Because a lot of leaders don't get positive leadership, which is my work. They don't get vulnerable leadership as they should, as Allison's talked about. It is the key to leadership, is being vulnerable. What she is saying is so true. And yet so many leaders don't get it. And you try to be vulnerable, that leader may take it as weakness. But if you perform well and you can express some vulnerability along the way, you might be also modeling that for them, showing them what it's like to, hey, I am very successful, but this is why I'm successful, because it's who I am. Then you could also change the tide by leading in that way and modeling that for others. But I do want to admit, yeah, it'll be hard if the culture is not a vulnerable culture to do that.
Okay, I think we have one last question, and then I'm going to select our winners for a raffle who are going to be receiving a copy of one of John's books, which you will be able to select yourself out of the one of the many excellent options. One last question, and it's actually still also related to vulnerability. Can you comment on the trend or advice of bringing your whole self to work? It seems like a recipe to cross boundaries.
It's not about a recipe to cross boundaries. It's knowing that you are a human being and you are a person and you do have a life. And that life and who you are ultimately is someone who also has a career and works. And in today's day and age, we're becoming more and more aware of that. And it's the informal relationships and connections within a company and organization that actually leads to successful ideas being transmitted and implemented. So those informal connections are important. The idea that we have to separate our work life and our personal life from, like, we're two different people, actually isn't a good idea. So bringing your whole self means bringing who you are and bringing everything associated that with it. But I do want to say it's bringing your whole best self to work. So you don't want to bring your problems from home to your work. You want to bring what you've learned from home. You want to bring your best to work. Because if we do have struggles at home, what happens is it does cross over and then lead to problems at work. A lot of times we're working and we're thinking about home, worried about home. Then we're at home and we're worried about work. When you are not present in both places, that's a double dose of misery and a double dose of guilt and despair. And so what you want to do is be engaged when you're at home, engage when you're at work, bring your whole self to each place of where you are. And that's the recipe for success. And I'm sure Allison has some wisdom to share on this as well.
I love all that. I think the only thing I would add in terms of inclusion, from an inclusion angle, is if anyone's heard the term covering. So if you're not bringing your whole self to work from an LGBTQ standpoint, or any other of those invisible differences that people don't understand, like you're going to spend so much energy trying to be someone you're not, that it's actually could affect your performance, and it eats up a lot of energy and creates some negative results from that. So I think when we think about bringing your whole self to work, it's just being really authentic and true to yourself. And I think you'll be relieved when you do that.
Love that.
Great. I have one last question from Mark Maltz. He asks, does your rhythm change as you get older, especially in terms of how you interact with people of other generations?
I think your rhythm changes not based on age. I just think it changes based on life, circumstances, jobs, roles, family, income. It changes for a variety of reasons. So for me, I'm interacting with a lot of young people in my life. And so for me, that it doesn't really affect that in terms of how you interact. But I think for me, it's just different based on where you are, success you have, the people you do get to interact with, your family, and how old your kids are. My kids are now 22 and 20. So my rhythm is much different than when they were 15 and 17. Just different. I'm in a different place. And so that affects your rhythm.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I just want to announce our winners really quickly. We will be sending copies of your books, John, to Gabrielle McIntyre and John Burnt. For the two of them, if you could reach out to Amanda Massa at amanda.massa@cornell.edu. Otherwise, we'll try to reach out to the two of you to get you the information you need to get your copies. So congratulations to those two winners. And I want to really, very sincerely thank you, Allison and John, for your time, for your knowledge. I think that all of our participants really got a lot out of this session. And, we would certainly love to have you back again as we evolve and change the topics that we're talking about. And I know that you have a plethora of guidance and good advice to share. So thank you again. Both of you stay safe, and to everybody who's on the line and who's joining us again, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time. I know you're all super busy, and so it means a lot for you to be here with us today. And from me personally and from the class of 2004 who coordinates this Lunch and Learn, we want to thank you so much for participating, and have a good day.